Sarah Martinez was just 7 years old when she saw her first Apache helicopter. It flew low over her neighborhood in a small Texas town called Millbrook. The sound was deafening and magnificent. The aircraft was dark green and looked like a giant metal dragonfly with teeth. Sarah stood in her backyard with her mouth open, watching it pass overhead. Her heart pounded with excitement she had never felt before. From that exact moment, she knew what she wanted to be. She wanted to fly one of those incredible machines. Her family lived in a tiny house on Elm Street. The paint was peeling off the walls and the roof leaked when it rained hard. Her father Miguel owned an auto repair shop that barely made enough money to pay the bills. Most months they worried about keeping the lights on. Her mother Rosa worked at Betty's Diner from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. Sometimes she worked even longer shifts when they needed extra money. Sarah had 2 younger brothers named Carlos and Jimmy. They shared one small bedroom while Sarah slept on the couch in the living room. Money was always tight in the Martinez household. Sarah wore hand-me-down clothes from her cousins. Her backpack had duct tape holding it together. For lunch, she usually had a peanut butter sandwich and an apple if they were lucky. But Sarah never complained about being poor. She knew her parents worked as hard as they could. What bothered her more was how people treated them. Teachers at school seemed to expect less from kids like her. Store owners watched them carefully like they might steal something. College seemed like something for rich kids from the other side of town, but Sarah had dreams bigger than Millbrook, Texas. Every single day after school, she would walk to the empty field behind the old Johnson farm. She would lie down in the tall grass that came up to her waist. The grass smelled sweet and made her nose itch sometimes. She would stare up at the endless blue sky and wait. The military base was only 15 miles away and helicopters flew over regularly. Sarah could identify each type by their sound before she even saw them. The Apaches were her favorite. They sounded powerful and purposeful. Sarah started going to the public library every Tuesday and Thursday. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, was a kind old woman with glasses that sat on the tip of her nose. Sarah asked her for books about helicopters and flying. Mrs. Henderson seemed surprised at first. Most kids wanted books about dinosaurs or princesses. But she helped Sarah find everything the small library had on aviation. Sarah checked out books with titles like Basic Aerodynamics and Introduction to Rotary Wing Aircraft. The words were complicated and many she did not understand at first. She would sit at the library table with a dictionary next to her aviation books. When she found a word she did not know, she would look it up. She filled notebooks with definitions and diagrams. She drew helicopters from every angle, trying to understand how they worked. Mrs. Henderson started ordering special books just for Sarah from other libraries in bigger cities. Sarah read about lift and thrust and drag. She learned about collective pitch and cyclic control. She studied weather patterns and navigation principles. All of this before she was even in high school. At school, Sarah became known as the weird girl obsessed with helicopters. Other kids made fun of her sometimes. They called her names like Plane Crazy and Sky Girl. During recess, while other girls played jump rope or gossiped about boys, Sarah sat under a tree reading her aviation books. She did not have many friends, but she did not mind much. She had a goal and nothing would distract her from it. Her grades were good in every subject, but she excelled in math and science. These subjects made sense to her logical mind. When Sarah was in 8th grade, she had to meet with the school guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson. Every student had to discuss their future plans. Mr. Peterson was a heavy man who always wore brown suits that were too tight. He smelled like coffee and had food stains on his tie. Sarah sat across from his messy desk, feeling nervous but determined. He asked her what she wanted to do after high school. Sarah took a deep breath and told him she wanted to join the military and become a helicopter pilot. Specifically, she wanted to fly Apache attack helicopters. Mr. Peterson actually laughed out loud. His belly shook and his face turned red. He told Sarah to be realistic. Girls like her did not become military pilots. That was for different kinds of people. People with money and connections. People from military families. He suggested she consider being a secretary or maybe a teacher if she really applied herself. He said nursing was also a good stable career for girls. Sarah felt her face grow hot with anger and embarrassment, but she did not cry. She looked Mr. Peterson straight in his condescending eyes and told him respectfully that she would prove him wrong. Her family had mixed reactions to her dreams. Her father, Miguel, was supportive in his quiet way. He told her she could do anything if she worked hard enough. He had come to America with nothing and built a business even if it struggled. Carlos and Jimmy thought it was cool that their sister wanted to fly helicopters. They bragged about it to their friends, but her mother Rosa was worried. She had seen too many dreams crushed in their community. She did not want Sarah to aim so high only to fall and get hurt. She suggested Sarah think about becoming a nurse or working with computers. Something more achievable, she said with love in her voice. Sarah's uncle Roberto was the worst. He came to Sunday dinner and lectured Sarah for an hour. He told her she was being foolish and embarrassing the family. Women did not belong in combat. It was against nature, he claimed. She should focus on finding a good husband and having children. That was what women were meant to do. Sarah listened quietly while her uncle spoke. She had learned that arguing would get her nowhere. But inside, her determination only grew stronger. Every person who told her she could not do it became fuel for her fire. In high school, Sarah joined every program that could help her. She enrolled in junior ROTC as soon as she was eligible. She was the only girl in the program at first. The boys did not take her seriously. During physical training, they expected her to fail. Sarah pushed herself harder than anyone. When they ran, she finished in the top 5. When they did push-ups, she did more than most of the boys. When they practiced drill and ceremony, her movements were crisp and precise. Slowly, she earned respect even from those who doubted her. Sarah also volunteered at the small municipal airport on weekends. She would ride her bicycle 10 miles each way, because her family only had one car and her parents needed it for work. At the airport, she did whatever jobs they would give her. She swept hangars and washed airplanes. She organized tools and helped mechanics with basic tasks. She watched everything and asked a million questions. The airport manager was a retired Air Force pilot named Chuck Williams. He was gruff and rarely smiled, but he saw something special in Sarah. He let her sit in cockpits and explained how different instruments worked. Chuck started giving Sarah books from his personal collection. These were advanced pilot training manuals that most people never saw unless they were in flight school. Sarah devoured them like they were adventure novels. She memorized procedures and emergency protocols. She studied weather theory and navigation techniques. Chuck would quiz her and was amazed at how much she retained. He told her honestly that the road ahead would be incredibly difficult. The military was changing, but slowly. She would face discrimination and doubt at every turn. But if anyone could make it, he believed it was Sarah Martinez. By her senior year of high school, Sarah had a clear plan. She would enlist in the Army immediately after graduation. She would request helicopter pilot training and accept nothing else. She knew the odds were against her. She knew she would face obstacles others never encountered. She knew people would try to break her spirit and crush her dreams. But Sarah had something that could not be taught in any school. She had an unbreakable will and a burning passion that kept her going through the darkest doubts. Every night before she fell asleep on that lumpy couch, she would close her eyes and imagine herself in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter soaring through the clouds. The day after graduation, Sarah walked into the Army recruitment office in her best clothes. The recruiter was a sergeant named Morrison, who had seen 1,000 young people walk through his door. Most had vague ideas about serving their country or paying for college. Sarah was different. She sat down and told him exactly what she wanted. She wanted to fly Apache helicopters. She wanted to serve in combat aviation. She would accept no alternatives. Sergeant Morrison had been in the Army for 15 years and he knew how things worked. He tried to steer her toward other military careers. Intelligence analyst perhaps, or communications specialist. These were good jobs with decent advancement opportunities, he explained. Sarah arrived at Fort Rucker, Alabama on a hot summer morning that felt like stepping into an oven. The air was thick and heavy with humidity. Sweat started rolling down her back the moment she stepped off the bus. Fort Rucker was known as the home of Army aviation. Every Army helicopter pilot trained here. The base was enormous, with helicopters constantly taking off and landing. The sound of rotor blades filled the air day and night. Sarah felt her heart race with excitement despite her exhaustion from the long journey. Basic training had been challenging, but Sarah had expected that. She excelled at most tasks and graduated near the top of her class. But that was just the beginning. Now came the real test. Flight school was where dreams either came true or died painfully. Sarah checked into her barracks and met her roommate. Her name was Jennifer, and she was training to be a Black Hawk pilot. Jennifer seemed nice, but also seemed surprised that Sarah wanted to fly Apaches. "Those are the hardest," she said with concern in her voice. Sarah just smiled and started unpacking her few belongings. The next morning, Sarah attended her first briefing with her flight class. There were 22 students total. Sarah looked around the room and her stomach dropped. She was the only woman. 21 men and her. Some of them stared at her with obvious curiosity. Others looked annoyed like she was invading their space. The instructor walked in and the room fell silent. He was a chief warrant officer named Blake with gray hair and cold blue eyes. He had been flying helicopters for 25 years. He looked at Sarah for a long moment before beginning his welcome speech. Chief Blake explained that most of them would not make it through the program. Apache training had one of the highest failure rates in military aviation. The helicopter was incredibly complex and unforgiving of mistakes. It required perfect coordination between hands and feet and eyes and brain all happening simultaneously. It required strength and endurance and mental toughness beyond what most people possessed. He said all of this while looking directly at Sarah. The message was clear. He did not think she belonged there. The first week was all classroom work. Sarah learned about the Apache's weapon systems and avionics and engines and hydraulics. The amount of information was overwhelming. Every system had backups and every backup had emergency procedures. Sarah stayed up late every night studying while her classmates went to the recreation center or watched television. She made flashcards and diagrams. She memorized until her brain felt like it would explode. When the first written exam came, Sarah scored 98%. The second highest score was 89%. Chief Blake raised his eyebrows when he saw her results but said nothing. Then came simulator training. This was where students learned basic flight controls before ever touching a real aircraft. The simulator cockpit was exactly like the real Apache. It had hundreds of switches and buttons and displays. Sarah climbed into the front seat where the pilot sat. The back seat was for the gunner, but students learned both positions. She strapped in and put on the helmet. The instructor's voice came through her headset, giving her the startup procedures. Sarah's hands moved across the controls, following the checklist she had memorized perfectly. The first simulated flight was just hovering. This sounds simple, but hovering. A helicopter is one of the hardest things in aviation. It requires constant tiny adjustments with all the controls. The cyclic stick controls forward and backward and side-to-side movement. The collective lever controls up and down. The pedals control rotation. All three must work together smoothly or the helicopter becomes unstable. Sarah lifted off the virtual ground and immediately the aircraft started drifting. She corrected too much and it lurched the other way. Sweat poured down her face as she fought the controls. After 30 minutes, her arms ached and her legs trembled. The instructor told her that was enough for the first session. Sarah had managed to hover somewhat steadily for maybe 2 minutes total. When she climbed out of the simulator, she saw some of her classmates smirking. One of them, named Jackson, made a comment about women not having the upper body strength for the Apache. Sarah ignored him and signed up for extra simulator time. She would practice every spare moment until her body adapted and the controls became second nature. Week after week, the training intensified. Students progressed from hovering to basic maneuvers to cross-country flights to tactical operations. Some students washed out immediately, unable to master the basics. Others made it further before hitting their limit. By the end of the third month, the class of 22 had shrunk to 16. Sarah was still there, but barely. Her arms had developed muscles she never knew existed. Her reactions had become faster. But she still struggled with certain maneuvers that seemed to come naturally to some of the men who had grown up playing sports or working physical jobs. The worst moment came during night flying training. Flying helicopters at night using night vision goggles is extremely disorienting. Everything looks green and flat. Depth perception becomes difficult. Students had to learn to trust their instruments even when their senses told them something different. Sarah was practicing a tactical approach to a landing zone. She came in too fast and misjudged her altitude. In the simulator, she would have crashed hard. The instructor took control and aborted the landing. When they got back on the ground, he made her run through what went wrong in front of the whole class. Chief Blake used Sarah's mistake as a teaching example. He explained in detail how her error showed poor spatial awareness, an inadequate scan pattern, and failure to properly interpret the instruments. He said these were common problems that some people simply could not overcome. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. That night, Sarah went back to her barracks and broke down. The stress and exhaustion and constant pressure finally cracked her tough exterior. She called her mother crying and said maybe everyone had been right. Maybe she was not cut out for this after all. Rosa Martinez listened to her daughter sob over the phone. Then in her gentle but firm voice, she reminded Sarah of something important. Every single person who ever told Sarah she could not do something had been proven wrong eventually. The guidance counselor who laughed at her dreams, the uncle who said women belonged at home, the recruiter who tried to steer her away from aviation, all of them wrong. This would be no different. Sarah needed to stop trying to be like the men around her. She needed to fly like Sarah Martinez and trust that her way was just as valid. Those words struck something deep in Sarah's heart. She wiped her tears and spent the rest of the night analyzing her mistake. She realized she had been trying to use the same techniques as Jackson and the other men, but her body was different. Her perspective was different. Her strengths were different. Instead of fighting against her nature, she needed to embrace it. She went back to the simulator the next day with a completely new approach. She used her smaller size to be more comfortable in the tight cockpit. She used her attention to detail, to catch instrument changes faster. She used her efficiency to waste no energy on unnecessary movements. Something shifted in Sarah's flying after that night. She stopped comparing herself to others and focused on being the best version of herself. Her hover became rock steady. Her approaches became smooth and precise. Her emergency procedures became flawless. She started moving up in the class rankings. By month 5, she was in the top 10. By month 6, she was in the top 5. Chief Blake noticed but said nothing. The other students noticed too. Some of them started asking her for advice on techniques that she had developed. Sarah made her first real friend in flight school during month 7. His name was Marcus Williams, and he was from Detroit. He was a big guy with a quick smile who treated everyone with respect. Marcus never seemed to care that Sarah was a woman. He just saw another student working hard to achieve their dream. They started studying together and practicing together. Marcus struggled with instrument procedures where Sarah excelled. Sarah struggled with certain physical maneuvers where Marcus was naturally gifted. They helped each other improve, and both of their scores went up. The final evaluation came in month 9. Students had to complete a complex mission profile that tested everything they had learned. It included navigation and tactical flying, and emergency procedures and weapons employment. The mission was flown in actual helicopters, not simulators. This was the moment that determined who graduated and who went home. Sarah barely slept the night before. She reviewed every procedure one last time. She visualized the entire flight from start to finish. When morning came, she was ready. Sarah's evaluation flight was smooth and professional. She executed every maneuver within. Sarah's first deployment came 8 months after she completed Apache qualification training. She was assigned to the 1st Battalion 227th Aviation Regiment. They were deploying to a forward operating base in a combat zone that everyone simply called the Sandbox. The base was in the middle of hostile territory surrounded by mountains and desert. Helicopters were essential here because the roads were too dangerous. Supply convoys got ambushed regularly. Medical evacuations happened almost daily. The Apache crews provided security and close air support for ground troops. This was what Sarah had trained for, but nothing could fully prepare someone for real combat. The flight to the deployment location took over 20 hours with multiple stops for refueling. Sarah sat in the cargo plane surrounded by other soldiers heading to war. Some slept. Some played cards. Some stared at nothing with fear in their eyes. Sarah tried to read but could not concentrate. Her mind kept going over emergency procedures and tactical formations. She wondered if she would measure up when bullets started flying for real. Training was one thing, but actual combat where people died was completely different. They landed at the forward operating base just after sunrise. The place looked like something from a movie. Concrete barriers and sandbags everywhere. Tents and temporary buildings scattered around. Helicopters parked in rows with armed guards watching them. The air smelled like dust and jet fuel and something else Sarah could not identify. Later, she learned it was the smell of burn pits where they disposed of trash. Everything had a brown tint from the fine dust that covered every surface. The temperature was already over 90 degrees, and it was only 7 in the morning. Sarah reported to the Aviation Operations Center to meet her unit. The commanding officer was a lieutenant colonel named Patterson. He was tall and thin with sun-damaged skin and tired eyes. He shook Sarah's hand and welcomed her to the unit. Then he assigned her to Apache tail number 841. Her co-pilot and gunner would be Chief Warrant Officer Carlos Rodriguez. Sarah's heart sank a little when she met Rodriguez. He was a veteran with 3 previous deployments. He had been flying Apaches for 7 years, and he made no effort to hide his disappointment at being paired with a rookie female pilot. Rodriguez barely looked at Sarah during their first meeting. He answered her questions with short responses. He made it clear through his body language that he did not want to be there. After the meeting, another pilot named Davis pulled Sarah aside. He told her not to take it personally. Rodriguez had lost his previous pilot in a crash 6 months ago. He blamed himself, even though the investigation cleared him of any fault. He requested to not fly anymore, but the unit was short on experienced gunners. Being forced to fly with a brand new pilot, especially a woman, was probably his worst nightmare. Sarah decided the only way to earn Rodriguez's trust was through her flying. Their first mission together was a simple supply run. They would fly to a remote outpost, deliver supplies, and return. It should take about 2 hours total. Sarah did her pre-flight inspection, carefully checking every part of the helicopter. Rodriguez watched her from a distance, smoking a cigarette. When they climbed into the aircraft, he double-checked everything she had already checked. Sarah bit her tongue and said nothing. She understood his caution, even if it stung. The flight to the outpost went smoothly. Sarah kept her movements precise and professional. She followed all radio procedures perfectly. She maintained proper formation with the lead Apache. Rodriguez gave minimal input from the back seat where the gunner sat. When they landed at the outpost, Sarah's landing was textbook perfect. She saw Rodriguez nod slightly, but he still said nothing. They loaded up the return cargo and headed back to base. Sarah thought maybe she had started to prove herself. Then everything went wrong. They were flying over a valley when the master caution light illuminated. Multiple warning tones sounded in Sarah's helmet. The number 2 hydraulic system had failed. Then the number 1 system started showing problems too. An Apache could fly with one hydraulic system, but losing both was catastrophic. The flight controls would become extremely difficult to operate. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She started running through the emergency procedures while simultaneously looking for a place to land. Rodriguez's voice came through the headset, sharp and urgent. He was calling out system failures and trying to troubleshoot the problem. Sarah tuned him out and focused on flying. The controls were already getting stiff. It felt like trying to steer a truck with no power steering. Every input required significant force. Her arms burned with effort. She spotted a clear area near a dried riverbed. It was not ideal, but it was flat enough. She pointed the nose toward it and started a careful descent. The Apache was fighting her now. It wanted to roll left, and she had to use all her strength to keep it level. Sweat poured into her eyes. Her breath came in short gasps. Rodriguez had gone quiet in the back seat. Sarah knew he was probably preparing for a crash. She refused to let that happen. She had promised herself she would always bring her crew home alive. This would not be the mission that broke that promise. Sarah managed to flare the helicopter at the last moment, bleeding off forward speed. The landing was hard but controlled. They hit the ground with a jarring impact that rattled her teeth. But they were down and alive. Sarah immediately started shutting down the systems. Her hands shook as she flipped switches. Only when the rotors stopped spinning did she allow herself to breathe. She had done it. She had saved them both. Rodriguez climbed out of the back seat and walked around to Sarah's door. She expected him to be angry or critical. Instead, he looked at her with something like respect in his eyes. "That was some damn good flying," he said quietly. Sarah nodded, unable to speak yet. They called for a recovery team and waited with the damaged Apache. While they waited, Rodriguez actually talked to her like a real person for the first time. He asked about her training and her background. He told her about his family back home. By the time the recovery team arrived, they had formed the beginning of a real partnership. After that mission, Rodriguez never questioned Sarah's abilities again. He started giving her advice and teaching her the tricks that only came from experience. He showed her how to read the terrain to predict enemy positions. He taught her shortcuts in the radio calls that saved precious seconds. He explained how to position the aircraft to give him the best firing angles. Sarah absorbed everything like a sponge. She wanted to learn from every experienced pilot she could. Word of Sarah's emergency landing spread through the base quickly. The maintenance crews examined the Apache and were amazed she had kept it flying long enough to land safely. Most pilots would have crashed trying to control it. Other aviators started looking at Sarah differently. She was not just the rookie female anymore. She was a pilot who had proven herself under pressure. The respect was subtle, but Sarah felt it. People asked her opinion in briefings. Crew chiefs requested her for difficult missions because they trusted her to bring the bird home. Sarah volunteered for extra missions whenever possible. She flew more hours than almost anyone else in the unit. She took the night missions that others tried to avoid. She flew in weather that grounded less experienced pilots. Each mission built her skills and confidence. She learned how to operate in sandstorms where visibility dropped to almost nothing. She mastered formation flying at night using only night vision goggles. She became expert at low-level navigation through mountain valleys. The missions were not all successful. Sarah saw things that would haunt her forever. She provided cover for ground troops who came under ambush. She heard the desperation in their voices over the radio as they called for help. She fired the Apache's weapons at enemy positions knowing she was taking lives. She flew wounded soldiers to medical facilities watching them bleed in the cargo bay. Some of them did not make it. Those were the hardest missions. The ones where despite her best efforts people still died. Sarah developed a reputation in the battalion. Her call sign became Guardian Angel because she had a gift for being in the right place at the right time. Ground commanders specifically requested her Apache when they needed air support. They trusted that she would keep them safe. Her crew chief painted a small angel on the side of her helicopter. Other pilots started asking her advice on difficult maneuvers. Even the senior warrant officers who had initially dismissed her now sought her input. But not everyone was supportive. Some pilots, especially older ones, still believed women had no place in combat aviation. They said Sarah was just lucky. They claimed the standards had been lowered to let her pass. They insisted she was a liability waiting to get someone killed. Sarah heard the whispers and ignored them. She let her flying speak for itself. Every successful mission was an answer to the doubters. The day started like any other at the forward operating base. Sarah woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of helicopters taking off. She went through her normal routine. She brushed her teeth with bottled water. She put on her flight suit that was stiff with dried sweat from previous missions. She grabbed a quick breakfast of powdered eggs and toast that tasted like cardboard. She checked the mission board to see what flights were scheduled. Her name was not listed for any missions that day. She felt relieved and disappointed at the same time. Relief because she was exhausted. Disappointment because she always wanted to fly. Sarah spent the morning doing paperwork and maintenance checks on her Apache. Rodriguez was off base visiting another unit. The weather was clear and hot. Temperature was already over 100 degrees by 10 in the morning. Sarah was reviewing flight logs when the alarm sounded, not the regular alarm for incoming mortars. This was different. This was the emergency scramble alert. Sarah's heart rate jumped immediately. She ran toward the operations center with other pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson was standing in front of a large map when Sarah arrived. His face looked grim. He quickly explained the situation. A special operations team was in serious trouble. They had been on a reconnaissance mission deep in enemy territory. Something had gone wrong. Now they were trapped and surrounded. The enemy had them pinned down in a valley with no escape route. They had wounded soldiers and were running low on ammunition. They needed immediate extraction or they would all die. Multiple helicopters had already tried to reach them. 2 Blackhawks attempted rescue but were driven back by heavy enemy fire. 1 Apache tried to provide cover but took so much damage it barely made it back to base. The enemy had clearly prepared an ambush. They had positioned anti-aircraft weapons all around the valley. Any helicopter flying in would be a target from multiple directions. The situation was getting worse by the minute. The special operations team leader estimated they had less than 1 hour before being completely overrun. Patterson looked at the assembled pilots with frustration and desperation. Most of the experienced crews were already in the air on other missions. The base was critically short on available aircraft and pilots. Then his eyes landed on Sarah. She was the only qualified Apache pilot currently on base. Her co-pilot Rodriguez was gone. The only available gunner was a young warrant officer named Chen, who had just arrived 2 weeks ago. Patterson hesitated. Sending a young female pilot and a brand new gunner on a suicide mission seemed insane, but he had no choice. Sarah stepped forward before Patterson could speak. She volunteered for the mission. Patterson asked if she understood what she was volunteering for. This was not a regular rescue. This was flying into a kill zone against an enemy that was ready and waiting. The chances of success were extremely low. The chances of being shot down were extremely high. Sarah looked Patterson in the eyes and said she understood perfectly. Those soldiers needed help and she was the only one available. She would not let them die without trying. Chen looked terrified when he learned he would be flying with Sarah. He had heard stories about her skills, but he had never flown combat with her. This would be his first real mission, and it was the most dangerous type possible. Sarah could see the fear in his young face. She pulled him aside and spoke calmly. She told him she needed him to trust her completely. She needed him to follow her instructions without hesitation. She promised she would do everything possible to bring them both home alive. Chen nodded and tried to look brave. Sarah studied the tactical maps carefully. She examined the terrain around the trapped team. She looked at where previous helicopters had been hit. She analyzed the enemy positions. Everyone expected her to take the same approach the other pilots had used. Fly straight into the valley from the south where the entrance was widest. But Sarah saw something the others had missed. There was a narrow canyon approach from the north. It was dangerous because the walls were close together. One mistake and she would hit solid rock, but it would mask her approach and might give her the element of surprise. The plan Sarah developed was either brilliant or completely insane. She would fly ultra-low through the canyon using the terrain to hide from enemy radar and visual spotting. She would come in fast, pushing the Apache to its maximum speed. The enemy would have only seconds to react before she was in position. Chen would suppress the enemy positions with the Apache's 30mm cannon, while Sarah covered the extraction. It was risky, but it was their best chance. Sarah and Chen ran to the flight line. The crew chief had an Apache ready to go. Sarah did her pre-flight check in record time. Every second counted. The special operations team was sending increasingly desperate radio calls. They were down to their last magazines of ammunition. Several soldiers were badly wounded. The enemy was closing in from all sides. Sarah climbed into the cockpit and started the engines. The familiar whine of the turbines was oddly comforting. Chen settled into the gunner seat behind her. His breathing was fast and shallow over the intercom. They took off and Sarah immediately pushed the nose down, gaining speed. She flew so low that the rotor wash kicked up massive clouds of dust. She headed straight for the canyon entrance. The walls rose up on both sides, narrow and threatening. Sarah threaded the Apache through the tight space with absolute precision. The clearance on each side was only a few feet. One gust of wind or one tiny mistake would slam them into the rocks. Chen was silent in the back seat, probably praying. Sarah's concentration was total. Everything else disappeared. There was only the helicopter and the canyon and the mission. Her hands moved on the controls with perfect smoothness. She made constant, tiny adjustments to keep them centered. The Apache screamed through the canyon at over 150 miles per hour. It felt like riding a missile. Sarah's eyes scanned ahead, looking for obstacles. Her brain calculated angles and distances automatically. They burst out of the canyon directly above the trapped special operations team. The enemy was completely surprised. They had all their weapons pointed at the southern valley entrance where they expected help to come from. Sarah had appeared from an impossible direction. She immediately pulled into a combat hover over the friendly positions. Chen opened fire with the cannon. The sound was deafening even through the helmet. 30mm rounds tore into enemy positions. Explosions erupted across the valley floor, but the surprise only lasted seconds. Then every enemy weapon in the valley turned toward Sarah's Apache. Tracers filled the air like deadly fireflies. The threat warning system in the cockpit screamed continuously. Multiple enemy fighters were trying to lock onto them with missiles. Sarah started evasive maneuvers while trying to stay over the friendly troops. She jinked left and right. She climbed and dove. She made the Apache dance through the air in ways it was never designed to move. Something hit the tail boom with a loud bang. Warning lights illuminated across the instrument panel. Sarah felt the controls get mushy. They had taken damage, but the Apache was still flying. Chen kept firing, providing cover for the soldiers below. Sarah heard the special operations team leader on the radio. They were making a break for better cover. They needed just 2 more minutes. Sarah gritted her teeth and held position. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. More hits. The Apache shuddered with each impact. Hydraulic fluid was leaking. The number 1 engine was showing problems. Sarah fought the controls as they became increasingly difficult to operate. Her arms burned with effort. Sweat poured down her face. She could taste blood where she had bitten her lip, but she held position. She gave the soldiers below the cover they desperately needed. Finally, the team leader called that they were secure. They had reached a defendable position. A ground convoy was en route and would reach them in 15 minutes. They would survive. Sarah did not wait another second. She turned the damaged Apache north and pushed the throttles forward. They needed to get out of the valley before the helicopter quit flying entirely. The enemy kept shooting. More rounds hit the aircraft. Systems continued to fail. Sarah flew the crippled Apache back through the canyon. It was even harder now with damaged controls. The helicopter wanted to roll left. She had to fight it constantly. Warning tones and lights demanded her attention, but she ignored them. The only thing that mattered was flying, getting them home. Chen was silent in the back. Sarah did not know if he was injured or just scared, speechless. They cleared the canyon and Sarah turned toward the base. The Apache was barely controlating now. Both hydraulic systems were failing. The backup flight control system had kicked in, but it would not last long. Sarah called the tower and declared an emergency. She told them she was coming in hot and might not be able to stop. They cleared all traffic and emergency crews rushed to position. 3 months passed after the rescue mission. Sarah continued flying combat operations, but something had changed. Word of what she had accomplished spread far beyond her small base. Other units heard the story. Pilots talked about the impossible rescue. The 14 special operations soldiers she saved made sure everyone knew who had pulled them out of certain death. They told anyone who would listen about the female Apache pilot who flew through hell to save them. They called her their guardian angel and meant it literally. One morning, Sarah was called to Lieutenant Colonel Patterson's office. She walked in expecting another mission briefing. Instead, she found Patterson standing with a man she did not recognize. He wore a Class A uniform with more ribbons and badges than Sarah had ever seen on one person. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. This was General Marcus Thompson. He was the commanding general of all Army aviation. Sarah immediately stood at attention and saluted sharply. General Thompson returned the salute and told Sarah to relax. His voice was deep and calm. He shook her hand with a firm grip. He told Sarah he had flown all the way from Washington specifically to meet her. He had read the reports about the rescue mission. He had interviewed the special operations soldiers she saved. He had reviewed her entire service record and flight history. He wanted to see for himself the young pilot everyone was talking about. Sarah did not know what to say, so she simply thanked him for coming. The general asked Sarah to walk with him. They left the office and strolled across the base. Helicopters flew overhead and soldiers hustled about their duties. General Thompson asked Sarah about her background. She told him about growing up poor in Texas, about being laughed at when she said she wanted to fly, about all the people who said she would never make it. The general listened carefully to every word. He nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. Then General Thompson shared his own story. He had grown up poor too in rural Georgia. His father had been a sharecropper who could barely read. Teachers told young Marcus that college was not for people like him. The military seemed like his only option for a better life. He joined the Army and discovered he loved flying. He faced his own obstacles and doubters. He worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove himself. Eventually, he rose through the ranks to become one of the most respected leaders in Army aviation. The general stopped walking and turned to face Sarah directly. He told her that in his 35 years of military service, he had flown with thousands of pilots. He had commanded tens of thousands more. He had seen incredible acts of courage and skill. He had witnessed flying that seemed to defy physics and logic. But what Sarah had done on that rescue mission was beyond anything he had ever seen. The tactical thinking, the precision flying, the courage under fire, the determination to save those soldiers no matter the cost. It was extraordinary. Then General Thompson said something that would change Sarah's life forever. He declared that Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was simply the best combat helicopter pilot he had ever seen. Not the best female pilot, not the best young pilot, not one of the best pilots. The best pilot, period. Better than men with twice her experience. Better than academy graduates with perfect pedigrees. Better than pilots who had been flying since before she was born. He said this clearly and firmly, leaving no room for doubt. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had worked so hard for so long to prove herself. She had faced discrimination and doubt and criticism at every step. She had pushed through pain and fear and exhaustion, and now the top general in Army aviation was telling her she was the best. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from, but it was real. General Thompson was recommending her for the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the highest honors for combat aviation. He was also recommending her for early promotion. The awards ceremony was held 2 weeks later. Sarah's parents flew in from Texas. Her father looked uncomfortable in his old suit, but his eyes shone with pride. Her mother cried happy tears from the moment she arrived. Rodriguez stood beside Sarah in his dress uniform. Chen was there too, looking much more confident than he had during that terrifying mission. The 14 special operations soldiers she saved all attended. They stood in formation and saluted her. Their team leader presented her with their unit coin and told her she was an honorary member of their brotherhood. General Thompson himself pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross on Sarah's uniform. He gave a speech in front of the assembled troops. He repeated what he had told Sarah privately. In front of hundreds of witnesses, he declared her the best combat helicopter pilot he had ever seen. The words echoed across the base. Cameras recorded it for the military news network. Within days, the video went viral online. Major news outlets picked up the story. Suddenly, Sarah Martinez was famous. The attention was overwhelming and uncomfortable. Reporters wanted interviews. News programs wanted her to appear on television. Sarah was not interested in fame. She just wanted to fly and do her job. But she understood that her story meant something to people. Young girls sent her letters saying she inspired them to pursue their dreams. Women in the military thanked her for breaking barriers. Parents of daughters told her she gave their children hope. Sarah realized she had become a symbol whether she wanted to be or not. Military recruitment offices reported a surge in women applying for aviation positions. Young women who had never considered the military were now asking about becoming pilots. Flight schools saw a dramatic increase in female applicants. The Pentagon started using Sarah's story in recruitment materials. She appeared on posters with the caption, "From small-town dreams to Apache wings." Sarah found it all embarrassing, but she participated because she knew it mattered. If her story could help even one girl believe in herself, then the discomfort was worth it. Sarah was invited to speak at various military events. She addressed new recruits at basic training. She talked to cadets at West Point. She spoke at the Pentagon to senior military leaders. Her message was always the same. She was not special or extraordinary. She had simply refused to accept other people's limitations. Everyone faces obstacles and doubters. The question is whether you let them stop you or use them as motivation. Sarah told audiences that the helicopter does not care about your gender or background. It only responds to skill and determination and heart. The most meaningful moment came when Sarah returned to her old high school in Texas. The school invited her to speak at an assembly. Sarah walked into the gymnasium where she had once felt so out of place. Now she wore her uniform with combat ribbons and pilot wings. Students filled the bleachers looking at her with awe. But Sarah looked for one person in particular, Mr. Peterson, the guidance counselor who had laughed at her dreams. He was there sitting in the back, looking small and uncomfortable. Sarah gave her speech to the students. She told them about having dreams that seemed impossible, about people telling her she would fail, about working harder than she thought possible, about never giving up no matter how difficult things became. She told them that anyone in that room could accomplish amazing things if they were willing to pay the price. After the speech, students mobbed her, asking questions and requesting autographs. Mr. Peterson quietly left without speaking to her. Sarah did not need his apology. Her success was answer enough. Sarah continued her military career with distinction. She completed her deployment and returned home safely. She was promoted to captain ahead of her peers. She was offered positions as an instructor and staff officer. But Sarah turned down the desk jobs. She wanted to keep flying. She loved being in the cockpit too much to give it up for career advancement. She volunteered for another combat deployment because that was where she felt she belonged. She became an instructor pilot teaching the next generation. Many of her students were women who specifically requested to train with her. But Sarah treated everyone exactly the same, regardless of gender. She demanded excellence and accepted nothing less. She pushed her students hard because she knew their lives would depend on the skills she taught them. She told them all the same thing her mother had told her. Stop trying to be like someone else. Fly like yourself and trust that your way is just as valid. Years passed and Sarah's legend only grew. She accumulated more combat flight hours than almost any Apache pilot in history. She received numerous awards and commendations. She was promoted to major and then to lieutenant colonel. Other female pilots followed the path she had blazed. The military slowly changed, becoming more accepting and inclusive. Women in combat aviation became more common, though still not easy. But every one of them knew about Sarah Martinez and what she had accomplished. 3 years after that life-changing night in Afghanistan, Sarah Martinez found herself standing in front of a classroom filled with wide-eyed young recruits at Fort Rucker. The same training facility where she had once been doubted and dismissed now displayed her photograph on the Wall of Honor. Her face looked out from between images of legendary pilots, with a small plaque beneath that read, Captain Sarah Martinez, Distinguished Flying Cross. Recipient, Apache Flight Instructor. The morning sun streamed through the classroom windows as Sarah looked at the 22 students sitting before her. Among them were 4 women, their faces showing the same mixture of determination and nervousness that Sarah remembered feeling years ago. She could see the doubt in some of the male students' eyes and the way they glanced at their female classmates with skepticism. It was a look she knew all too well. Sarah began her first lesson by walking to the whiteboard and drawing a simple diagram of an Apache helicopter. Her voice was calm and steady as she explained the basic systems that made the machine work. She used simple words that everyone could understand, breaking down complex concepts into pieces that new pilots could grasp easily. When she talked about engine power, she compared it to car engines. When she explained rotor systems, she used ceiling fans as an example. During the practical training sessions, Sarah watched her students carefully. She noticed how Jennifer, a young woman from Ohio, hesitated before every maneuver because her previous instructor had constantly criticized her technique. Sarah also saw how Marcus, a confident young man from a military family, tried to show off during basic exercises instead of focusing on safety procedures. One afternoon, Sarah pulled Jennifer aside after a particularly difficult training flight. The young woman had tears in her eyes after making several small mistakes during landing practice. Sarah sat down beside her on a bench outside the flight hangar and spoke quietly about her own early struggles. She told Jennifer about the nights she had cried herself to sleep and the mornings she had wanted to quit. She explained how every mistake was actually a step toward becoming better, not a sign of failure. Jennifer listened carefully as Sarah described her first solo flight in an Apache. Sarah had been so nervous that her hands were shaking as she started the engines. She had made 3 bad approaches before finally landing safely, and her instructor had made her practice the same maneuver 15 more times until she got it right. The key, Sarah explained, was not to be perfect immediately, but to learn from every error and keep trying until the movements became natural. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked individually with each of her students. She helped Marcus understand that flashy flying was dangerous flying, and that real skill came from smooth, controlled movements. She showed the quieter students that confidence grew with practice and knowledge. Most importantly, she taught all of them that being a pilot meant being responsible for the lives of others, which required constant learning and improvement. Sarah also began to notice changes in how the other instructors treated female students. Word of her success had spread throughout the training command, and her example had opened doors that had been closed before. Female recruits were no longer automatically steered toward support roles. Instead, they were evaluated based on their abilities and test scores, just like their male counterparts. The real test came during a major training exercise that simulated a combat rescue mission. Sarah flew as the lead pilot with her advanced students following behind in formation. The scenario required them to navigate through simulated enemy territory, locate wounded soldiers, and provide cover while medical helicopters evacuated the casualties. Jennifer was flying as Sarah's wingman, with Marcus as her co-pilot. As they approached the target area, thick clouds rolled in unexpectedly, reducing visibility to almost zero. Radio communication became difficult due to simulated enemy jamming. These were exactly the kind of challenging conditions that separated good pilots from great ones. Sarah's voice came through the radio calm and clear, giving simple directions that helped her students navigate through the dangerous weather. She used landmarks they could still see and gave them specific headings to follow. When Jennifer became disoriented in the clouds, Sarah guided her step-by-step back into formation using basic reference points and simple commands. The exercise was a complete success. All aircraft returned safely and the simulated rescue was completed perfectly. After landing, the exercise commander, Colonel Williams, praised the entire flight for their professional execution under difficult conditions. He specifically mentioned how well the student pilots had handled the unexpected weather challenges. That evening, Sarah received a phone call from General Thompson, who had been promoted to command the entire Apache training program. He told her that her teaching methods were being studied and implemented at other training bases across the country. Her approach of using simple explanations, individual attention, and building confidence through gradual skill development was producing some of the best new pilots the Army had seen in years. More importantly to Sarah, she was watching young women succeed in numbers that had never been seen before. Her classroom had become a place where dreams were nurtured instead of dismissed, where students learned that skill and determination mattered more than background or gender. Jennifer graduated at the top of her class and went on to serve with distinction in overseas deployments. As Sarah watched her students receive their wings and move on to operational units, she felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond her own flying achievements. She had not only proven that she could fly an Apache helicopter better than anyone expected, but she had also opened the sky for others who had been told they did not belong there. The girl who had once been told she would never fly was now teaching the next generation that any dream was possible with enough courage and persistence.